Greetings, dear viewers, and welcome to today's gripping and haunting story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. Now, let's step into the world of Northwood High School, where a tragedy forever changed the lives of many. Northwood High was, on the surface, a bastion of suburban idealism. Manicured lawns, a gleaming athletic complex, and an academic reputation that consistently placed its graduates in prestigious universities. Yet, beneath this polished veneer, a quiet unease had begun to fester, spreading like a persistent rumor through the hallowed halls. It started as whispers, hushed conversations in the cafeteria, furtive glances in the hallways, and coded warnings exchanged between friends. These whispers almost invariably centered around one figure, Mr. Harrison Thorne, the esteemed AP English literature teacher. Thorne was, by all accounts, a charismatic and brilliant man. His lectures were legendary, weaving complex literary theories with captivating anecdotes. He could recite entire passages of Shakespeare from memory, his voice resonating with an almost theatrical flair. Students clamored for a spot in his class, believing it to be a golden ticket to academic success and intellectual enlightenment. Parents adored him, seeing him as the epitome of a dedicated educator, a mentor who could unlock their children's full potential. The school administration, particularly Principal Anya Sharma, viewed him as an invaluable asset, a star performer who elevated Northwood's academic standing. He was, in essence, untouchable. But the whispers told a different story. They spoke of a darker side to Thorne's charisma, a manipulative edge that manifested in subtle yet insidious ways. It began with favoritism, an almost overt preference for certain students, usually bright, ambitious, and often vulnerable individuals who craved his approval. These chosen few would be lavished with praise, given special assignments, and privy to his private insights, making them feel uniquely privileged. But this privilege came at a cost. Thorne's attention was a double-edged sword, and its withdrawal could be devastating. He had a knack for identifying and exploiting insecurities. A shy student's fear of public speaking would be met with an unexpected, pointed question during class, designed to trip them up, followed by a theatrical sigh of disappointment. A high achiever's obsession with perfect grades would be gently nurtured, only to be subtly undermined with vague criticisms on essays, leaving them perpetually striving for an elusive, undefined perfection. He rarely resorted to overt aggression. His weapon was psychological manipulation, a slow erosion of self-worth masked by academic rigor and intellectual challenge. One of the most frequent victims of Thorne's psychological games was Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was a senior, brilliant and artistic, with a quiet intensity that belied her sharp mind. She loved literature, and initially, Thorne's class had been a dream come true. He had recognized her talent, praising her insightful interpretations and encouraging her to delve deeper into complex texts. Sarah, initially flattered, began to pour her heart and soul into his assignments, seeking his approval with an almost desperate fervor. But as the semester progressed, Thorne's attention shifted. He began to subtly criticize her work, always with a smile, always with a seemingly constructive tone. "Sarah, this is good, but I know you can do better. There's a certain spark missing." Or, "Your analysis is thorough, but perhaps you're overthinking it. You're losing the essence." These seemingly innocuous comments chipped away at Sarah's confidence. She started to doubt her own abilities, her passion for literature slowly replaced by a gnawing anxiety. She would spend sleepless nights revising essays, only for Thorne to offer a dismissive glance or another veiled criticism. Her best friend, Emily Carter, witnessed Sarah's transformation with growing alarm. Emily, more grounded and less susceptible to Thorne's charms, saw through his facade. She noticed how Sarah, once vibrant and confident, became withdrawn and perpetually stressed. Emily tried to talk to her, to point out the pattern, but Sarah was trapped in a cycle of seeking Thorne's validation. "He's just pushing me to be better, she'd insist, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "He sees potential in me." The whispers intensified when a junior named David Miller suddenly dropped Thorne's class mid-semester. David was a talented writer, known for his edgy, unconventional style. Thorne had initially championed him, showcasing his poetry in class. But then a subtle shift occurred. Thorne began to mock David's more experimental pieces, subtly ridiculing his artistic choices in front of his peers. David, initially defiant, slowly retreated into himself. One day, after a particularly humiliating critique, David walked out of class and never returned, switching to an online English course. When questioned, he simply mumbled about creative differences and refused to elaborate further. But the tremor in his voice and the haunted look in his eyes spoke volumes. The administration, however, remained oblivious or perhaps willfully blind. Thorne's glowing student evaluations, carefully curated through his manipulative charm, overshadowed any vague complaints that might trickle in. Students, fearing repercussions, rarely spoke out directly. They knew Thorne had influence, and a negative mark on their transcript, or a dismissive letter of recommendation, could jeopardize their college applications. The fear was a powerful deterrent. Principal Sharma, a woman driven by data and results, saw only Thorne's impressive statistics. High AP scores, student acceptance into Ivy League schools, and the general aura of academic excellence he projected. When a parent once tentatively raised concerns about Thorne's intense teaching style, Sharma politely dismissed them, reassuring them that Mr. Thorne was simply pushing his students to achieve their full potential. "He's a rigorous educator," she'd explained with a confident smile. "Some students find it challenging, but ultimately, it's for their own good." But the insidious nature of Thorne's abuse wasn't about academic rigor. It was about control, about systematically dismantling a student's self-esteem and rebuilding it in his own image, or rather, destroying it entirely. He thrived on the power dynamic, on the subtle anxieties he could sow, the emotional strings he could pull. He created an environment where students were constantly performing for his approval, perpetually walking on eggshells, terrified of falling out of his favor. The Whispers, however, found an unlikely amplifier in a new student, Alex Chun. Alex had transferred to Northwood midway through the school year, a quiet observer with a keen sense of justice. He quickly noticed the strained atmosphere in Thorne's class, the way students' shoulders hunched when Thorne entered, the forced smiles, the subtle flinches. He saw Sarah's escalating anxiety, the way her hand trembled when she had to speak in class. Having come from a school where open communication and student well-being were prioritized, the atmosphere in Thorne's class felt alien and deeply unsettling to Alex. He started compiling his own observations, discreetly taking notes, listening intently to the hallway gossip. He noticed the pattern of Thorne's targeted criticism, the way he would isolate certain students, slowly chipping away at their confidence. He saw the relief on students' faces when Thorne was absent, and the palpable tension that returned with his presence. Alex wasn't prone to idle gossip. He was a methodical thinker, and the evidence he was gathering painted a disturbing picture. One afternoon, after watching Sarah silently weep in the library over a red-penned essay, Alex approached Emily. He had heard their whispered conversations, seen Emily's protective concern for her friend. "Something's not right with Mr. Thorne," Alex stated, his voice low and serious. "He's doing something to Sarah." Emily, initially guarded, looked at Alex, surprised by his directness. "You see it too?" she asked, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Everyone sees it, Emily," Alex replied. "They're just too scared to say anything." He paused, then added, "But this can't go on. Sarah's breaking. We need to do something." Emily hesitated. "What can we do?" "Nobody listens. David tried to say something, I think, but the school just brushed it off. Thorne's too powerful. We can't just let him get away with it," Alex insisted, a determined glint in his eyes. "We need to gather evidence. Real, undeniable proof. Not just whispers." And so, a quiet alliance was formed in the shadow of Northwood High's gleaming facade. Alex and Emily, fueled by a shared sense of injustice and a fierce loyalty to Sarah, began their own investigation, unaware that their actions would set in motion a chain of events far more devastating than they could ever imagine. The whispers of Northwood were about to turn into a deafening roar. The alliance between Alex and Emily, initially clandestine, slowly began to draw in others who had been silently suffering under Thorne's manipulative sway. Their first recruit was Maria Rodriguez, a quiet but perceptive student who sat in the back of Thorne's class, absorbing everything. Maria had always been an excellent student, but Thorne's subtle undermining had begun to erode her self-assurance, making her doubt her previously sharp analytical skills. She recognized the fear in Sarah's eyes because she felt it herself, the constant anxiety of whether her latest essay would meet Thorne's ever-shifting, opaque standards. Maria, though initially hesitant, was convinced by Alex's methodical approach. He proposed a systematic gathering of evidence, detailed notes on Thorne's specific criticisms, instances of public humiliation, inconsistencies in grading, and any recorded conversations where his manipulative tactics were evident. They encouraged students to discreetly document their experiences, either by writing them down immediately after class or by making voice recordings on their phones a risky but potentially crucial piece of evidence. The group expanded further when they reached out to Ben Carter, Emily's older brother and a former student of Thorne's. Ben, now in college, still carried the scars of Thorne's psychological abuse. He had been one of Thorne's chosen ones in his junior year, a brilliant writer who had idolized the teacher. But as Ben's independent thought began to emerge, Thorne had systematically crushed his spirit, labeling his creative endeavors as uninspired or derivative, leading to a severe creative block that Ben was still struggling to overcome. Ben's testimony, detailed and agonizingly personal, provided a crucial historical context to Thorne's patterns of behavior. He confirmed their suspicions. Thorne's tactics were not new. They were a long-standing, meticulously honed method of control. "He makes you believe he's helping you," Ben explained, his voice hollow. "But what he's really doing is breaking you down, piece by piece, so he can rebuild you in his own image. Or, if you resist, he just discards you." The group, now including Alex, Emily, Sarah, who, though still fragile, found a spark of defiance in their collective action, Maria, and Ben, operated with extreme caution. They met in hushed corners of the library, after-school clubs, or even at Emily's house when her parents were out. They compiled a growing dossier, screenshots of vaguely worded, subtly demeaning emails from Thorne, transcripts of his public critiques, meticulously noting his tone and body language, testimonies from students who had witnessed his favoritism and subsequent dismissal of others, and even, in a bold move by Alex, a discreet audio recording of a particularly tense class discussion where Thorne openly ridiculed a student's interpretation of a text. The evidence was damning. It wasn't just a collection of subjective complaints. It was a clear pattern of psychological manipulation, emotional abuse, and academic sabotage. They meticulously cross-referenced their notes, identifying recurring phrases, specific targets, and the escalating nature of Thorne's tactics. They observed how he would isolate students, turn them against each other through subtle competition, and cultivate an atmosphere of fear and distrust. As their dossier grew, so did the emotional toll on the group. Sarah, reliving her experiences, would sometimes break down in tears, but the support of her friends and the sense of fighting back slowly began to empower her. Emily became fiercely protective, her anger at Thorne fueling her resolve. Alex, ever the strategist, remained focused on the objective, his quiet determination unwavering. Maria, initially timid, found her voice, offering keen insights into Thorne's classroom dynamics. Ben, though still scarred, found a sense of catharsis in helping others avoid his fate. Their plan was to present this overwhelming evidence to Principal Sharma. They believed that with such irrefutable proof, the school administration would have no choice but to act. They carefully crafted a formal letter, outlining their findings, attaching their compiled evidence, and requesting a formal investigation into Mr. Harrison Thorne's conduct. They decided that Alex, being a relatively new student and thus less susceptible to Thorne's direct influence, would be the primary spokesperson, accompanied by Emily and Maria, to ensure their collective voice was heard. Sarah, though present in spirit, was deemed too emotionally vulnerable to directly confront the administration at this stage. The day they finally scheduled the meeting with Principal Sharma felt heavy with anticipation. They walked into her office, a sterile space filled with framed diplomas and awards, their hearts pounding. Principal Sharma, a poised woman with an air of professional authority, greeted them with a polite, if somewhat detached, smile. She had been informed that a group of students wished to discuss concerns regarding a faculty member, a common enough occurrence at a large high school. Alex began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, explaining their observations and presenting the meticulously organized binder of evidence. Emily interjected with personal anecdotes, describing Sarah's decline and the widespread fear among students. Maria offered her perspective, corroborating their claims with specific instances she had witnessed. They spoke of the psychological toll, the academic sabotage, and the pervasive fear that Thorne had instilled. Principal Sharma listened, her expression unreadable. She nodded occasionally, her gaze flicking between the students and the binder. When they finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "I understand your concerns," Principal Sharma finally said, her voice calm, almost placid. "And I appreciate you coming forward. However, Mr. Thorne is a highly respected member of our faculty. His teaching methods, though rigorous, consistently produce excellent results. We've never had any formal complaints of this nature that have been substantiated." Alex, emboldened by their evidence, pushed back. "But Principal Sharma, we have provided extensive documentation. This isn't just a few isolated incidents. It's a pattern of abuse. We have student testimonies, recorded conversations, emails." Principal Sharma held up a hand. "I hear you, Alex, and I will certainly review this information. However, I must also consider the due process for a faculty member of Mr. Thorne's standing. Accusations of this nature are very serious and require careful, discreet investigation." She then began to subtly dismiss their concerns, hinting that students might be misinterpreting Thorne's challenging teaching style. She suggested that perhaps the students were simply struggling with the demands of AP English, or that their perceptions were colored by personal biases. She even subtly questioned their motives, suggesting that perhaps they were acting out of resentment or a desire to undermine a successful teacher. "It takes a great deal of courage to be a teacher like Mr. Thorne," she continued, her voice softening, "to push students beyond their comfort zones. Sometimes, that can be perceived as harsh, when in reality, it's a dedication to excellence." The students left Principal Sharma's office deflated and disheartened. Her words had a chilling effect, mirroring Thorne's own manipulative tactics. Gaslighting, dismissing, and subtly blaming the victims. They had hoped for immediate action, for justice, but instead, they were met with bureaucratic resistance and veiled skepticism. "She's not going to do anything, is she?" Emily whispered, her voice choked with frustration, as they walked down the deserted hallway. Alex's jaw was clenched. "Not directly, maybe, but we've put it on her desk. She can't unsee it now. We've planted the seed." Unbeknownst to them, Principal Sharma, after their meeting, did review the dossier. She was, for a fleeting moment, genuinely disturbed by the sheer volume and consistency of the allegations. The audio recording, in particular, sent a shiver down her spine. But her loyalty to the school's reputation, her long-standing admiration for Thorne, and her fear of a potentially messy scandal quickly overshadowed her initial concern. She convinced herself that the students were overreacting, that Thorne was simply misunderstood. She rationalized that a formal investigation would disrupt the school, damage Thorne's career, and create an unnecessary PR nightmare. Instead of launching a formal investigation, Principal Sharma decided on a discreet conversation with Thorne. She called him into her office, presenting him with a redacted summary of the students' concerns, carefully omitting any direct accusations or identifying details. She framed it as feedback she had received, suggesting he might want to adjust his approach to ensure all students felt supported. Thorne, ever the manipulator, listened patiently, his face a mask of concern and understanding. He apologized profusely, feigning surprise and regret. He assured Principal Sharma that he would reflect on his teaching methods and make necessary adjustments. He even subtly hinted that perhaps some students were struggling with the rigor of his class and were looking for an excuse. Principal Sharma, relieved by his cooperative demeanor, accepted his assurances. She believed she had handled the situation deftly, avoiding a crisis while subtly addressing the feedback. She saw it as a win-win. Thorn was warned, the students' concerns were heard, and the school's reputation remained intact. She logged the incident as resolved and moved on. But for Alex, Emily, Sarah, and the others, Principal Sharma's inaction felt like a betrayal. They had laid bare their pain and fear, only to be dismissed. The storm, instead of being averted, had only intensified, gathering dark clouds of frustration and anger. They had hoped for an institutional solution, but now they realized they were on their own. The stage was set for a confrontation, not with the system, but with Thorn himself. The whispers had grown into a rumble, and it was about to erupt. The principal's dismissal of their concerns had a profound and dangerous effect on the students. The initial hope they had felt, the belief that justice would prevail, curdled into a bitter resentment. For Alex, it solidified his conviction that the system was unwilling to protect them. For Emily, it ignited a fierce, protective anger for Sarah. And for Sarah, it was the final, devastating blow to her already fragile psyche. Thorn, emboldened by Principal Sharma's gentle feedback and the lack of any real repercussions, subtly escalated his abuse. He knew he was under a watchful eye, but instead of retreating, he became more cunning, more insidious. His criticisms grew sharper, his psychological games more refined. He started singling out Sarah with renewed intensity, making her the primary target of his veiled contempt. He would praise other students' work with exaggerated enthusiasm, then deliver a quiet, cutting remark about Sarah's, designed to be heard only by her, yet loud enough to sting. "Sarah," he'd say, after a particularly glowing review of another student's essay, "yours was an attempt. You still struggle with that depth, don't you? It's a shame. I really thought you had it in you." The constant barrage of subtle put-downs, combined with the school's apparent indifference, pushed Sarah to the edge. Her artistic passion, once her refuge, became another source of anxiety. She stopped sleeping, her nights filled with the relentless replaying of Thorn's words. Her appetite vanished, and her once vibrant eyes became sunken and perpetually shadowed. She withdrew from her friends, isolating herself, convinced that Thorn was right, that she was fundamentally flawed. Emily, desperate, tried to reach her, but Sarah was trapped in a spiraling depression, a silent scream of despair. The group, witnessing Sarah's rapid decline, felt a desperate urgency. They tried to appeal to Principal Sharma again, but she reiterated her stance, insisting that she had addressed the issue and that any further complaints were simply overreactions. The door to institutional help was firmly shut. Alex, seeing Sarah's broken spirit, felt a cold fury. He realized that passive resistance and bureaucratic appeals were useless. Thorn would not be stopped by polite conversations or formal letters. He needed to be confronted directly and unequivocally. He started spending more time observing Thorn not just in class, but his routine outside of it. He noticed Thorn's habits. The way he lingered in his classroom after school, often alone, grading papers or preparing for the next day. He observed Thorn's route to his car in the dimly lit faculty parking lot, the precise time he usually left. A dangerous idea began to form in Alex's mind. A desperate, reckless plan born out of frustration and a burning desire to protect Sarah. Emily, sensing the shift in Alex's demeanor, grew increasingly worried. She saw the simmering anger in his eyes, the tight set of his jaw. "Alex," she pleaded one afternoon, "what are you thinking? You're not going to do anything stupid, are you?" "Something has to happen, Emily," Alex replied, his voice low and strained. "Sarah is dying inside. The school won't help. What else is there? Violence isn't the answer," Emily insisted, fear creeping into her voice. "It'll just make things worse. You'll ruin your own life, and it won't fix anything. Maybe Alex conceded. But what if it's the only way to make him stop? To make them listen? The internal debate raged within Alex, a battle between his logical, methodical nature and the overwhelming emotional response to Sarah's suffering. He knew the risks, the potential consequences. But every time he saw Sarah's hollow gaze, every time he heard Thorne's smug voice in class, the conviction grew stronger. Someone had to stand up. Someone had to make him pay. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Thorne had just returned a particularly personal essay written by Sarah, an essay she had poured her heart into, detailing her struggles with anxiety and her passion for literature. Thorne had scrawled a dismissive, vague, and self-indulgent, lax academic rigor across the top, accompanied by a C grade. He then publicly, though subtly, alluded to it in class, making a general comment about students who mistake personal therapy for literary analysis. Sarah, who had been clinging to a fragile thread of hope, finally snapped. She walked out of class, tears streaming down her face, and collapsed in a deserted hallway, sobbing uncontrollably. Emily found her moments later, her heart aching at the sight of her friend's utter devastation. "I can't do this anymore, Em," Sarah choked out between sobs. "He's right. I'm worthless. I'm nothing." Emily held her, tears blurring her own vision. She knew with a chilling certainty that if something wasn't done, Sarah would not survive this. That evening, Alex, fueled by a righteous rage, made his decision. He couldn't stand by and watch Sarah be destroyed. He would confront Thorne, not with violence, but with the full weight of their evidence, with a threat so potent that Thorne would have no choice but to resign or face public exposure. He would force the school's hand, one way or another. He was planning a direct, verbal confrontation, a final attempt to make Thorne truly understand the damage he had inflicted and to face accountability. He didn't tell Emily or Maria his exact plan, only that he intended to talk to Thorne. He knew they would try to dissuade him from anything that seemed too risky. But in his mind, the risk to Sarah's life outweighed any personal risk to himself. The next day, Alex waited. He lingered after school, feigning work in the library, watching the clock. As students streamed out, he walked purposefully towards the English department. Thorne's classroom door was ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the dim hallway. Alex could hear the faint rustle of papers, Thorne's familiar hum. He pushed the door open. Thorne was at his desk, head bent over a stack of essays, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Alex, to what do I owe the pleasure? Still grappling with your Austen essay?" Alex walked further into the room, his hands clenched into fists, the heavy binder of evidence clutched tight. He placed it firmly on Thorne's desk, the thud echoing in the quiet room. "This isn't about my Austen essay, Mr. Thorne," Alex said, his voice steady, though a tremor of adrenaline ran through him. "This is about everything." Thorne's smile faltered. He looked at the binder, then back at Alex, a flicker of irritation, then recognition, dawning in his eyes. "What is this, Alex? Some kind of student protest?" His tone was dismissive, condescending. "This is proof, Mr. Thorne," Alex countered, opening the binder and flipping to the first page. "Proof of your emotional abuse. Proof of your psychological manipulation. Proof of how you systematically destroy students' confidence." He pointed to the meticulously compiled notes, the transcripts, the email printouts. "We have dozens of testimonies. We have recordings. We have everything." Thorne's face hardened. The mask of the charming educator began to crack, revealing a cold, calculating anger underneath. "This is preposterous, Alex. A ridiculous fabrication. Are you trying to blackmail me?" "I'm trying to make you stop," Alex said, his voice rising, the carefully contained anger finally breaking through. "You're destroying Sarah. You destroyed David. You've hurt countless students, all for your own twisted ego games." Thorne stood up, his posture suddenly imposing. "How dare you accuse me of such things? I am an educator. I push my students to excel." You clearly don't understand the demands of academic rigor. You're just a disgruntled student, making wild accusations. No, Alex almost shouted. I'm a student who sees what you are. A bully, predator. And you're not going to get away with it anymore. He pointed to the binder. We're taking this to the school board, to the local news. We'll expose you. You will lose your job. You will lose your reputation. You will lose everything. The threat hung heavy in the air. Thorne's face contorted, a mixture of rage and panic flashing in his eyes. His perfectly constructed world of academic superiority and unquestioned authority was crumbling before him. He had never been truly challenged, never been truly exposed. You think you can just waltz in here and threaten me? Thorne snarled, his voice low and menacing, a stark contrast to his usual modulated tone. You have no idea who you're dealing with, boy. I'll make sure you never get into a decent college. I'll make sure your transcript is blacklisted. I'll destroy your future. You won't destroy anyone else, Alex declared, standing his ground, refusing to back down. Not anymore. The tension in the room was palpable, a suffocating weight. Thorne's eyes, usually warm and engaging, were now cold, filled with a dangerous fury. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. He had always controlled the narrative, always controlled the interaction. Now, Alex had stripped that control away, exposing the rotten core beneath the polished facade. In that moment, a desperate, irrational fear mixed with a blinding rage consumed Thorne. All his carefully constructed defenses, his carefully maintained image were under attack. The threat of exposure, of public humiliation, was unbearable. He saw his career, his life, crumbling before his eyes, and Alex, this quiet, determined student, was the architect of his downfall. He lunged. It was a sudden, unexpected move, fueled by panic and primal anger. Alex, though anticipating a verbal escalation, was caught off guard by the physical attack. Thorne grabbed Alex by the collar, his eyes wild, spitting venom. You little brat. You think you can ruin me? Alex struggled, pushing back, trying to free himself. The binder clattered to the floor, scattering papers. Thorne, stronger and older, pushed Alex against the wall, his grip tightening. Fear, raw and visceral, coursed through Alex. This wasn't a debate. This was a fight for survival. As Alex tried to twist away, he felt a sharp, searing pain in his side. Thorne, in his frenzied attack, had inadvertently, or perhaps deliberately, in his rage struck Alex with a heavy, sharp-edged paperweight from his desk. Alex gasped, a choked cry escaping his lips, his hand instinctively going to the wound. He felt a sudden rush of blood, warm and sticky, seeping through his shirt. The pain was excruciating, blinding. His legs buckled. Thorne, seeing the blood, seeing the terror in Alex's eyes, froze for a split second, the rage momentarily giving way to a sickening realization of what he had done. But it was too late. Alex, weakened and disoriented, stumbled. In a desperate, final surge of adrenaline, he instinctively pushed back with all his remaining strength, a wild, uncoordinated thrust. Thorne, off balance from his own aggressive lunge, stumbled backward, hitting the corner of his desk with a sickening thud. He let out a gasp, a sound of pain and surprise, then crumpled to the floor, his eyes wide, unseeing. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. Alex, clutching his bleeding side, his breath coming in ragged gasps, stared in horror at the still figure of Thorne on the floor. His mind struggled to comprehend what had just happened. The confrontation, meant to be a verbal battle, had spiraled into something far more catastrophic. The breaking point had become a fatal one. The whispers of Northwood were about to turn into a deafening scream. The silence in Mr. Thorne's classroom was shattered by the frantic, panicked ringing of Alex's phone. It was Emily calling to check on him. He fumbled for it, his hands slick with blood, the phone slipping through his grasp and clattering to the floor. The sound, amplified in the sudden stillness, was deafening. Alex, still clutching his bleeding side, stumbled backward, his eyes fixed on Thorne's lifeless form. The sharp, metallic scent of blood filled the air. A cold, nauseating wave of shock washed over him. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. His mind raced, a jumbled mess of fear, adrenaline, and a dawning, horrifying realization. He had intended to confront, to expose, to stop the abuse. He had never intended this. He looked around the room, his eyes darting from Thorne to the scattered papers of the dossier, to the heavy paperweight lying innocently on the floor, its edge glinting under the fluorescent lights. The scene was a tableau of chaos and tragedy. He heard footsteps in the hallway, drawing closer. Someone was coming. Panic seized him. He had to call for help. He had to explain. But what would he say? How could he explain this? The image of Thorne's face, contorted in rage, then surprise, then emptiness, was seared into his mind. The door burst open. It was Mr. Davies, the school janitor, on his nightly rounds. He saw Alex, bleeding and trembling, and then his gaze fell on Thorne's motionless body. His eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God!" Mr. Davies exclaimed, his voice a choked whisper. "What happened here?" Alex tried to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't form. He simply pointed, a shaky finger indicating Thorne, then his own bleeding side. Mr. Davies, an older man with a kind face, quickly assessed the situation. He saw the blood, the motionless teacher, the distraught student. Without another word, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, sirens, and a whirlwind of questions. Police officers swarmed the classroom, their faces grim. Paramedics tended to Alex's wound, which, though deep, was not life-threatening. He was questioned relentlessly, his fragmented account of the confrontation slowly pieced together by the detectives. He explained Thorne's abuse, the school's inaction, his attempt to expose the truth, the sudden lunge, the struggle, the accidental push. He showed them the binder, now stained with blood, its contents a silent testament to Thorne's cruel reign. Meanwhile, news of the incident spread like wildfire through Northwood. The whispers that had once permeated the school halls erupted into a cacophony of shock, grief, and disbelief. Parents, students, and faculty struggled to comprehend the unthinkable. A beloved teacher, dead. A promising student, involved in a fatal confrontation. Principal Sharma, when informed of Thorne's death, collapsed in her office. The carefully constructed facade of Northwood High, her pride and joy, had been shattered. The feedback she had so casually dismissed, the concerns she had rationalized away, had now manifested in a horrific tragedy. The guilt, sharp and suffocating, began to consume her. Emily, along with Maria and Sarah, rushed to the police station as soon as they heard. They found Alex pale and shaken, but alive. Seeing him, their relief was immense, but it was quickly overshadowed by the gravity of the situation. When they learned of Thorne's death, a complex mix of emotions washed over them. Shock, horror, and a strange, unsettling sense of relief that the torment had finally ended, even in such a brutal fashion. They immediately offered their statements to the police, corroborating Alex's account of Thorne's abuse, the dossier, and their attempts to seek help from Principal Sharma. Sarah, despite her fragility, spoke with a newfound strength, detailing the extent of Thorne's psychological torment, her voice clear and resolute. Maria provided her meticulous notes, outlining Thorne's manipulative patterns. Ben, contacted by Emily, drove down from college, his testimony adding historical weight to their claims. The police investigation was extensive. They interviewed dozens of students and faculty members. As the students bravely came forward, the full extent of Thorne's abuse began to unravel. The whispers, once confined to hushed conversations, became loud, undeniable truths. Students recounted stories of public humiliation, subtle threats, manipulative mind games, and academic sabotage. The carefully curated image of Mr. Harrison Thorne, the brilliant and dedicated educator, was meticulously dismantled, revealing the manipulative abuser beneath. The school administration, caught in the eye of the storm, was forced to confront the truth. Principal Sharma, initially defensive, found herself increasingly isolated. The media descended upon Northwood, transforming the local tragedy into a national scandal. News reports highlighted the students' desperate pleas for help, the school's inaction, and the tragic consequences. The carefully crafted narrative of academic excellence crumbled under the weight of the unfolding revelations. Public opinion was fiercely divided. Some mourned the loss of a talented teacher and condemned Alex as a violent perpetrator. Others rallied behind Alex, seeing him as a victim forced to extreme measures to defend himself and others from a predator. The debate raged on social media, in local forums, and in national news commentaries, fueling an already volatile situation. The police, after a thorough investigation, announced their findings. Thorne's death was determined to be the result of a fall, specifically hitting his head on the desk after being pushed. While Alex's push was indeed the direct cause, the context of the confrontation, Thorne's aggressive lunge, the paperweight striking Alex, and the years of documented abuse painted a complex picture. They acknowledged the overwhelming evidence of Thorne's long-standing emotional and psychological abuse of students, and the repeated failures of the school administration to address the concerns brought to them. Alex was charged, not with murder, but with involuntary manslaughter. The charge recognized the accidental nature of Thorne's death, but also the fact that Alex's actions had directly led to it. The legal battle would be arduous, fraught with moral and ethical complexities. In the aftermath, Northwood High was a shell of its former self. The gleaming facade had been irrevocably cracked. Students were traumatized, many grappling with the guilt of not speaking out sooner. Teachers were reeling, some defending Thorne, others grappling with their own complicity in remaining silent. Principal Sharma faced calls for her resignation, her career in tatters. The once pristine reputation of the school was now synonymous with scandal, abuse, and tragedy. The unraveling truth was agonizing, painful, and deeply uncomfortable for the entire community. It exposed not just the darkness within one teacher, but the systemic failures that allowed such darkness to flourish unchecked. It forced everyone to confront difficult questions about accountability, responsibility, and the true cost of prioritizing reputation over the well-being of students. The whispers were gone, replaced by a deafening silence that spoke volumes about the irreparable damage done. The storm had passed, but its devastating impact would forever reshape Northwood High and the lives of those caught in its wake. The trial of Alex Chun became a national spectacle, a crucible where the competing narratives of victimhood, responsibility, and justice were fiercely debated. The prosecution painted Alex as a hot-headed student who had taken matters into his own hands, leading to a teacher's tragic death. They emphasized the illegality of his actions, arguing that no amount of perceived injustice justified violence. The defense, led by a seasoned public defender who saw the systemic